Hello everybody, it's Stewart Payne from Read 20 and the Readmobile, and I am in lovely Yosemite Valley today. We're reading a story about John Muir, the great conservationist and naturalist, and how he persuaded President Theodore Roosevelt to set aside this beautiful land so that we can enjoy it today and into the future. Right, so let's begin. This is Camping with the President. Got some pretty cool pictures. Here we go. President Theodore Roosevelt mounted his favorite horse, and he shook the reins. He and Renown shot out the White House stable door, and they galloped straight for the woods on their daily ride. As always, hooves pounded behind them. The president made sure that the Secret Service had to ride pretty hard to keep up with him. Fun guy. America's 26th president loved his busy job, except for one thing. He missed what he called the strenuous life. He wanted to hike alone through the woods, whistling for birds. He longed to chop wood or to hunt wild animals. I think I got a response. Most nights, he set aside time to read. Some of his favorite books were about nature. One evening in the White House, the president finished John Muir's newest book, Our National Parks. The author's description of California's Yosemite National Park fascinated the president. He tried to picture the 3,000-foot-high walls that surrounded Yosemite Valley. And besides all the waterfalls, there were granite boulders bigger than buildings, and they had names like Half Dome and North Dome. Distant mountain peaks soared over 10,000 feet into the sky. Muir's nature essays clearly indicated a man with strong opinions about land preservation. Roosevelt enjoyed lively discussions. It would be exciting to talk with the country's best-known expert on conservation and explore Yosemite. But why couldn't he? I mean, he was the president of the United States, right? Well, the president picked up his pen. He wrote so fast that his spectacles danced on the tip of his nose. Dear Mr. Muir, I am coming west. I want to go camping with you and no one else. In his letter, he explained that he'd already decided to take a fact-finding trip in the spring of 1903. That was about 118 years ago. Roosevelt had never seen the far west, and he was eager to meet the people and learn about the natural resources, the minerals, the trees, and the water. This visit would help the president make better decisions about the region in the future. Roosevelt wrote Muir that he would first visit Yellowstone National Park, and after seeing the Grand Canyon and Arizona, he would come to California by train. To wrap up his trip, the president asked Muir to guide him through the Yosemite area. While camping and avoiding dignitaries, they could talk. The president grinned as he stamped his official seal on the back of the envelope. Camping sounded bully. Yeah, bully. He especially wanted to see California's giant sequoia trees, the largest living things in the world. 4 whole days in the Yosemite wilderness, the president was giddy with excitement. He's going to need some Western clothes. Months later, the president's special train sped southeast across California from Oakland on the coast to reach the tiny town of Raymond at the end of the line. I'm delighted to meet you, President Roosevelt said, pumping John Muir's hand up and down. And soon Roosevelt and Muir were escorted, along with the rest of the presidential party, in stagecoaches some 30 miles up through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada into the Yosemite wilderness. The two men stood in the Mariposa Grove of big trees in front of the Grizzly Giant, one of the largest sequoia trees in the world. On either side of Muir and Roosevelt, very important men, including George Pardee, the governor of California, posed together for the cameras. Poof! Burning white flash powder blinded them. Roosevelt smiled his famous toothy grin for the cameras. Reporters would write about the Grizzly Giant and the other trees in this grove, but they wouldn't have much else to write about because the president didn't plan on seeing them anytime soon. The president announced that he was prepared to go into the Yosemite with John Muir. I want to drop politics absolutely for 4 days. And he punched his fist in his hand for emphasis. 4 days. Everyone roared with disappointment. But there was no arguing with the strong-willed leader of the United States. He waved away the reporters. All the dignitaries climbed back into their stagecoaches. 30 cavalrymen mounted their dapple gray horses, and they all saluted the president. And finally, the president even ordered his Secret Service men to kindly stay away. Spurs jingled and leather creaked. The president watched everyone head down the zigzagging road to the nearest town. 3 men waited with pack animals in gear. They were under the watchful eye of Government Ranger Charlie Leidig. Charlie's family ran a hotel in Yosemite Valley where he had lived and worked his entire life, and he would be the perfect man to be in charge of the day-to-day details of this adventurous camping trip. Centuries-old giant sequoia trees surrounded Roosevelt. He reached out to touch the cinnamon-colored bark of the Grizzly Giant. It felt spongy. Twisted tree limbs reached toward the sky, so heavy they didn't even sway in the afternoon wind. Deep in the forest, a squirrel chattered, and then a bird sang. The president whistled back, hoping to draw out his first Yosemite bird. A robin dropped from a branch and pushed debris about on the forest floor. Roosevelt pulled out a pocket-sized notebook he always carried. He wrote down, Yosemite Wilderness, May 1903, Robin. Then the president sucked in a deep breath of brisk mountain air. Now this is bully, he shouted. Boys, let's build a campfire. When Roosevelt woke up the next morning, he recognized the wonderful music of a hermit thrush, one of his favorite birds. The president was starving. He wrestled the fry pan from Charlie, and before long, bacon-scented smoke drifted into the forest. Then the president scrambled 6 eggs beside a slab of bacon. He ate a huge breakfast, happy to be away from the White House cooks who fussed over his diet. After nibbling on a crust of bread, John Muir picked up a sequoia cone. He shook it. Tiny dark seeds, much smaller than snowflakes, spilled out. Muir explained that from just one seed, the Grizzly Giant had sprouted nearly 2,000 years earlier. Other trees in the grove were almost as old. Many were hundreds of years old. Sequoias, Muir added, grew on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains, but nowhere else in the entire world. Roosevelt's eyes widened with surprise. Moments later, Muir scrambled up a nearby sequoia tree stump like a mountain goat. He is pretty spry for a 65-year-old, Roosevelt thought. The stump's flat top was big enough to hold a dozen men or more. Muir yelled that it had taken several days to saw this tree down, and when it crashed to the ground, the tree shattered into splinters. Sequoia wood was of little use except for fence posts, but lumbermen still continued to cut these amazing trees down. The president shook his head in disgust. How could anyone cut a tree that's been growing for so long? For a fence post? What if future generations never got to see a giant sequoia tree? He and Mr. Muir would have to chat about forest preservation, but not right now. It was time to go. Roosevelt swallowed one last cup of coffee, strong and hot, just like he liked it. Ooh. His horse snorted and danced sideways along the trail. The president looked back, and nobody seemed to be following him. Had he truly escaped the watchful eyes of his Secret Service men? Well, hours later, the 2 men arrived at Glacier Point with its spectacular views. Swirling wind tried to take the president's hat as Roosevelt and Muir inched out onto the overhanging rock at the tip of Glacier Point. Yosemite Valley lay 3,000 feet directly below them. The Merced River, a curving ribbon of gray-blue, flowed through the green valley floor. Rock walls, interspersed with waterfalls, ringed the valley. Muir pointed out upper and lower Yosemite Falls, the mist rising from below, pointed out the sheer face of Half Dome, the rugged-looking high mountain country stretched beyond. And for a change, Mr. Roosevelt was speechless. Suddenly, reporters appeared, interrupting with questions and calls of, "Mr. President, Mr. President." The wind picked up their words and blew them away. The president's jaws snapped shut. Where had they come from? Once again, people and cameras surrounded him, and the president was angry, very angry. He marched to his horse. "Boys, keep them away from me." Roosevelt barked at the Secret Service, glad for once that they were lurking nearby. How could he rough it with a crowd around him? At sunset, Roosevelt and Muir picked a new camping spot. The president grabbed an axe and insisted on starting a fire. Sweat flew from his forehead as he chopped firewood. Before long, a sizzling hot campfire glowed in the dark. And once again, Roosevelt took the fry pan from Charlie. While the president chewed his way through a platter of steak and fried potatoes, Mr. Muir spoke of the need to provide government protection around every wild grove and forest on these mountains. He urged Roosevelt to set aside the land, including the Mariposa Grove of big trees and the state-run Yosemite Valley. The president had never met anyone who talked as much or as fast about the importance of nature. In fact, John Muir seemed to live on words, not food. And Roosevelt listened, and as he listened, he heard a noise in the trees above him. Was it one of the dreaded Secret Service men guarding him from a tree? No. He listened again, and then he chuckled, and in his notebook the president wrote, "Owl." Whew. 4 to 5 inches of snow covered them by morning. "Oh, this is bullier yet. I wouldn't miss this for anything," the president shouted, shaking snow from his blankets. He shaved by the light of a roaring campfire, then trimmed and waxed his mustache. And that morning he followed a narrow trail that hugged the vertical granite walls. And it was late afternoon when the small, dust-coated group rode into Yosemite Village. Then just a cluster of tents and wooden buildings. A waiting crowd cheered loudly and pressed forward, hoping to shake the president's hand. He dismounted. "Mr. Muir and I slept in a snowstorm last night. This has been the grandest day of my life, one I shall long remember. Just think of where I was last night, up there." With a sweep of his hand, he pointed to Glacier Point, among the pines and the silver firs, and without even a tent. The president waved his hat. "Now, Mr. Muir and I will pitch camp near Bridal Veil Fall." He mounted his horse, which reared suddenly, legs pawing at the air. Charlie stepped forward to push back the throng. Tails swishing, the pack animals stood at the edge of the campsite. The air turned chilly after the sunset. Suddenly a mule brayed. Twigs snapped. Suspecting that they had been followed, Charlie disappeared into the dark. He told hundreds of waiting admirers in the nearby meadow to leave because the president was very tired. They went. Some of them even tiptoed away so as not to annoy their president. As the moon came up, the president took off his shoes and rolled up his pant legs. Wading in the icy cold stream, Roosevelt hollered to John Muir. He was as happy as a boy out of school. Then the two men lay on their mattresses of ferns and fir branches, still talking about the waste of natural resources. For once, the president mostly listened. He respected the mountaineers' advice on the importance of preserving land around the entire country, while above them El Capitan glowed in the nighttime light. The Merced River flowed softly. Bridal Veil Fall thundered, and it was growing late. The president was tired. "Good night, boys," he said. He burrowed under his blankets and fell asleep, and for the third night in a row, he snored. Too soon? The sunlight streamed into the valley, and the president's horse-drawn stagecoach brought his official party along. "It was bully," the president said, pumping John Muir's hand. "I have had the time of my life." Roosevelt climbed into his stagecoach and leaned over. "Goodbye, John. Come and see me in Washington," he said. And then he motioned John to come closer. "And be patient. Congress may sleep through my long-winded speeches, but I promise to wake them up." What a magical place, Roosevelt thought. Gazing around one last time, he was glad that he had come to Yosemite. He felt more alive than ever, thanks to his bully-good camping trip with John Muir. Once back in Washington, Roosevelt would be able to do some forest good, as he liked to say. Roosevelt peered in every direction as his stagecoach circled the valley. He wanted to savor his memories of Half Dome, of sunlight washing over the glacial rocks, Yosemite Falls roaring, of deer grazing, and the lingering smell of a Yosemite campfire. And then he waved one final goodbye, and moments later, the president was gone in a cloud of dust.
I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed our story, and I hope you'll also post your own thoughts and ideas about some fascinating story you might have read this summer. And don't forget to post them on Facebook with the hashtag Read20SummerFun. If you know me, you know I'm all about the big ideas and these stories that I share. And I hope you'll share these stories with people you know as well. One of the big ideas that really strikes me from this story is that you can never underestimate the power of a few knowledgeable, charismatic people to change the world for the better. So hope you're having a great summer. I hope you're finding some great stories to read, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas, and maybe even seeing them online. Our friend Reggie the Readtriever wants you to know that you can find lots of other read aloud videos on our website and other information about Read 20 and the Readmobile at read20.org. Thanks again. Come back and see us. Have a great day.